السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نحمده ونصلي ونسلم على رسوله الكريم. ما بعد. First of all, I'd just like to welcome everyone on the webinar. I know it's a Saturday night when we're recording this, so I'm assuming you've got family events to attend to, etc. as well. So Jazakumullah khair Ahsan Jazak for giving us your time. We've just got about an hour or so, just over an hour, and I want to start off by just discussing this course. So, inshallah ta'ala, the course is all to do with Islamic history. And inshallah, firstly, I want to get one thing out of straight off the bat, which is that this is a course for beginners and intermediates. So there have been a lot of people who have been asking that, is this course going to be too highly advanced? There is going to be there will be some highly advanced discussions on the group at times, but you don't need to pay attention to them, and you're not required to always pay attention to some of these advanced discussions that are taking place. So when it comes to these discussions, I want you to just kind of, whatever resonates with you, you can, listen to, you can watch, and whatever is a bit too advanced, you can obviously skip, and you don't need to be in track with everything on the Telegram group, which is what you will be added to once you join the group, once you've registered for the course. So what we're doing at this moment in time is now slowly, inshallah, everyone will start to register on the website. And inshallah ta'ala, within the next 2 weeks, everyone will be into their own portals. And this course will inshallah be in your portal and you will be able to access it. Now, so far the sign up for this course has been quite incredible, alhamdulillah. And we've had over 200 people signing up for this course. So this is why we wanted to host this webinar, because we thought, you know what, there could be more people out there who just actually don't know how amazing this course is actually going to be, inshallah ta'ala. And we wanted to open this opportunity up for everyone to kind of access the course. So firstly, I also want to clarify another thing, that with this course, there is no prior reading required. So we will give you a handbook, and in that handbook, we discuss essentially all the reading material is provided for you. But it's kind of like we will take you step by step. When I say we, it's going to be Mullah Adil. I'm obviously just saying we, as in I'll be just monitoring in the side and just helping him out if there's any help needed. And it's going to be a fun, engaging lesson, 1.5 hours, once a week, every Thursday evening, and that's going to be UK time. So it's going to be 8:30 p.m. until 10 p.m. So that's a perfect time if you've got kids, etc. You can put the the little ones to bed, and you can just catch up, and you could have a cup of tea with you, and it's going to be very casual in the sense that we're not going to have any exam at the end of it. This is just something for you to really benefit from. And the importance of Islamic history, Mullah Adil will be covering that very soon. In fact, I think Mullah Adil will speak about this in more detail. He actually, and this is where I actually learned about him from a while back, mashallah, which is that some of my relatives actually told me that they attended his programs in the masjid, wherein he was delivering this exact same type of course. And they, it's beneficial for people who don't know anything about history. So that's really important for me to get that point across. There'll be diagrams, there'll be charts, there'll be maps. He'll give videos for you to watch. It's already in the handbook. And he's gonna go through the handbook, inshallah, today, which you will see very soon. Now, so recordings will be provided as well. This is a common question I always get with every course. We provide a recording for every course that we do. Obviously, you have to register, and it will be in your portal once you've registered, inshallah. And one of the unique features of this course, if you've had a look at the handbook, you'll notice every single lesson is a different empire. So if you've missed one lesson, it's not the end of the world. Obviously, you want to catch up as much as you can. But if you've missed it, it's not the end of the world. The next lesson will be a different empire. We'll be looking at something totally different. So you can still hop on board, and you can still benefit from whatever you can kind of access. And you get lifetime access to all the recordings. I do apologize. Someone's decided to do some fireworks literally at the perfect time when I've started this. In terms of the mode of delivery, Mullah Adi will discuss. It's not going to be exactly PowerPoints, and that can get a bit tacky as well, having constant PowerPoints. It can get a bit boring as well. So Mullah Adi will discuss the method in which he will be speaking about all the different ways in which he will, inshallah, ensure that the content is delivered in a engaging manner, inshallah. And then just the one thing that I wanted to discuss before I hand it over to Mullah Adil to actually speak about why Muslim history is important, why is this course important, is that I actually just wanted to show you on the actual screen of how you can make sure that you basically get yourself registered for this course. So if I can just bear with me one moment, I'm just going to show you. So if I've opened up Google here, and I'm just going to go on islamicknowledge.co.uk, just to show you exactly how you can access the course and how you can make sure you get your registration done before the actual course starts, which is on the 5th of December. It will be every Thursday, 8:30 p.m. to 10 p.m. UK time. So that's GMT at this moment. And you just go here, click on Islamic history. We've got a few other courses. If you want to access them, that's fine as well. But for the purpose of this session, we're speaking about the 1-year course on Islamic history. And then you can scroll down. You can have a look at, this is a sample handbook. So this is only 19 pages. The actual handbook is much larger. And then you can just register by clicking one of these 2 payment options as well. But inshallah ta'ala, you're going to really enjoy this course. It's a 1-year course and it's perfect for beginners. And it's absolutely brilliant for someone who's just, wanting to know more about history. I'll be honest with you, I've actually really benefited from this handbook, even though it's just a sample. I've actually got myself some of the books that Mullah Adil has actually made a reference to. This one as well, absolutely fantastic. I've got myself a few other ones as well, which I've spoken about on the Telegram group as well. I had read Lost Islamic History a long while ago, so I'll make a YouTube video on that as well, inshallah ta'ala, which I want to speak about. It's a fantastic book. And so, but you don't need to do any reading if you're not interested in that. The readings and the discussions are only there for people who are really into that kind of stuff. Otherwise, you can just tag along. You'll still benefit. In fact, you'll probably benefit as much as the rest of everyone else, because it's geared to you, the person who literally is just going to be sitting there with a cup of tea, just wanting to just watch about what happened in the history of Islam and all the different events that happened. Now, without wasting too much time, I've already taken about 6-7 minutes. I'm going to hand it over to Mullah Adil Sahab, inshallah ta'ala, and he's going to discuss with us the importance of Islamic history, and he's also going to speak to us about how, inshallah, this course will really benefit you as well, inshallah ta'ala. So I'm just going to find Mullah Adil. I know he's here somewhere, and I'm just going to make him the host because that is going to be the best option. And inshallah, I'll let him just take over essentially.
Okay then, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Can I just get a thumbs up from the chat if you can see the screen here? Because in the past, I've always had some technical difficulties. Brilliant. Okay, so like Mufti Muaz said, thank you to everybody for taking out time on a Sunday evening. And most people will probably be out at a dessert parlor, maybe enjoying time with family. And also, we won't be able to start until we give our due regards and gratitude to Mufti Muaz as well for very magnanimously and graciously hosting us and facilitating this course. So may Allah bless him. And the logistical work behind the scenes, I can imagine, is very taxing. So may Allah make it easy for him. So let's rub our hands together. Why Muslim history? Just to give you a rundown, we'll probably finish at around 9:10, so maybe an hour. So for around 25 minutes to half an hour, the itinerary will be like this. For the next 25 minutes to half an hour, I'll briefly run through brilliant. Okay. So I'll briefly run through why Muslim history is relevant and why you should dedicate some of your time during the week, more specifically 1.5 hours on a Thursday night, to studying Muslim history. But this part of the lecture is quite insular. So you can just listen to this and it'll be an orientation and an induction in and of itself. And then after this part of the lecture, so this segment, we'll move on to the run through or an overview of the course handbook. Now, a lot of the information has already been typed out and you can find that on the first, I think 7 or 8 pages of the handbook, but we'll go through it together. And then the last 10 minutes we'll leave for some questions and answers, because I know some people might have some burning inquiries that they want to make. And like Mufti Muaz was saying, this is probably the only PowerPoint I've made for this course. I'm not too keen on PowerPoint. I don't like, my preferred method of murder is not death by PowerPoint, because it's either there's too much information on there or it's a little bit distracting. And if I want to add something mid-session, then I'll have to hop off and then add something and then jump back on. So my preferred method is actually to use a whiteboard. Now, we're not in a conventional classroom setting, so we don't actually have a good old-fashioned whiteboard, but I think Zoom has a feature where you can use whiteboard. So that way, what I normally do is I'll create a spider diagram. So you have the dynasty or the ruler or the caliph or the topic in the middle, and then we'll be branching out. We'll be talking about different topics and different genres. We'll run through the narrative arc. later on.
Mullah Adil, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Because there are people waiting in the waiting room. What I'm going to try to do is, if I can, I'm going to try to stay the host, and I'm going to let you just share your screen if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
That will be better, inshallah. So I'm just going to let you, inshallah, share your screen. And that should still let you now share the screen. Just let me know if that's working, just so I can, whilst you're speaking, I can just admit everyone into the session. There's a lot of people, mashallah, still waiting to join. So
Yeah,
alhamdulillah.
okay. We're good to go. Okay, so why Muslim history? I've just got a couple of, well, this is, I guess, a breakdown of the itinerary. So we're going to look at a couple of case studies in the first 10 to 15 minutes, and then I'll give you a list of whys, and then we've got the course orientation and the last 10 minutes dedicated to a question and answer session. I like to just throw pictures out there straight off the bat and maybe throw you off balance a little bit. So here you have a picture of a hunter and a lion he's just killed. And this is probably in South Africa somewhere. Now, there is a saying, and it's an African adage, and it actually comes from a Nigerian novelist and a poet called Chinua Achebe. Chinua Achebe is the name of the poet. And he has sort of adapted an age-old African proverb. And this is a very Instagrammable quote. And you can literally just fill your ears with the quote and then leave if you want to. I wouldn't advise that, but you can leave after this because this is all you need. This is all the motivation that you could ever require to pick up a book or to join a lecture or to commit yourself to a studying program. And his saying is, until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. Right, so I'll say that again. Until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. One last time, because that's jam-packed with lots to then unpack. Until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. And that's by Chinua Achebe. Now, before I move on to the next one, I'm going to post a number in the chat. Where's the chat gone? And this is a special number for me. The number 27. Now, the number 27 is relevant because that's how many Ottoman historians exist in Japan. Right? 27 Ottoman historians. And these are academics who've been through a rigorous process, who've graduated, who've written dissertations and theses on the Ottomans, and they have graduated as masters of the field, and now they're researchers or professors or associate professors in a prestigious university in Japan. Right? And just picture an atlas in your brain. How far away from Turkey is Japan? And historically speaking, Japan has had very little connection, very little engagement with the Ottomans. Japan has maintained a policy of isolation, at least for the past 5 centuries, because of if picky and particular to engage with politically, diplomatically, and commercially. So they have invested in 27 historians to study the Ottoman past. So you can imagine how many historians they've produced and cultivated within their own universities to study their own history. So the problem we're having today is, and you'll see when we run through the course handbook, a lot of the recommended material is actually written by non-Muslims. A lot of the material as part of the targeted reading quotas. Now, there's a huge, huge problem there because everybody will bring their own worldview, they'll bring their own biases, they'll bring their own preconceived, fabricated notions to the table, and they'll write any period of history from their own vantage point. So there is no such thing, I'll just tell you this for free, there is no such thing as neutrality. Some historians call it the pretensions of objectivity, meaning you pretend like you're writing from a neutral point of view. You might convince yourself, and you might try to pull the wool over other people's eyes, that you are a neutral, impartial, independent third party, and you're standing aloof from proceedings, and you're writing history completely neutrally. You have no vested interests. And we know this is patently false because you might bring Christian baggage, you might Hindu baggage, you might bring secular baggage, you might bring feminist baggage to the table. So history does not exist within a vacuum. Everybody will always write history through the lens of whatever ideology or whatever worldview they might espouse or subscribe to. So now that doesn't mean to say all of the material written by Western non-Muslim academics should now be discarded and should be sidelined. We have a particular policy when it comes to approaching the works of non-Muslims on Islam. But that's a daunting and quite lamentable fact in and of itself. Now, me and Mufti Muaz have been through the traditional seminary process, and I'm sure a lot of the participants will have as well. In a traditional seminary, so in a Darul Ulum or an Islamic university, these are meant to be bastions. These are meant to be the strongholds and fortresses of traditional Islamic learning. And it's very unfortunate and quite lamentable that our syllabus does not even treat history as an afterthought. It's not even a garnish or a side dish or a side quest. You're just told to read maybe some books about the prophetic era, and in a graduate or a seminarian's mind, history only exists from the time of the Prophet up until the end of the era of the rightly guided Orthodox caliphs, which is with Hassan radiallahu anh. Now, that time span is only around, the Prophet was brought into this world, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, 570, and then the Orthodox Caliphate period ended at 661. And the Prophet's mission and his ministry began around about the year, about 610, right? So that's only around 45 to 50 years. And we're now in the year 2024. So we have a huge, what's called blind spot. We have been conditioned to ignore Muslim history so that it can be taken over and claimed and appropriated by other actors. And these are people who might not appreciate our sensitivities. These are people who might not appreciate our black and white zones. These are people who might not appreciate our red tape demarcations. These are people who might not show the same respect to the genre of history. They won't approach Muslim history from the angle of a Muslim. And there is a huge, massive difference between the way a Muslim carries out history or practices history and the practitioner of history from a Western university. And Dr. Yaqub Ahmed, and I'm going to be quoting him quite a lot, because if you think about popular scholars, I don't like to use the word, but it's in vogue now. So celebrity scholars online, you'll have celebrity Quran specialists, maybe Numan Ali Khan, or you might have celebrity or well-known famous specialists on hadith, maybe some muftis, maybe some in different fields, spirituality and geopolitics. There's Sami Hamdi now, he's made a name for himself in geopolitical analysis. What about in history? Think about it. If you have a question on history, would you feel comfortable maybe going to your local imam? Would you feel comfortable going to your local scholar? And if you type in anything online, then I guarantee the first 50 search results will all be from Western academies. And the Western academic approach is loaded, is heavily ideologically pregnant with the idea of secularism, the idea that God has to be taken out of the equation. And this is hugely problematic and abhorrent from a Muslim point of view, because what's in fact happening is Allah's agency, Allah being the supervisor of historical affairs, that whole concept is now being drained out of history. That concept has been jettisoned. So history is now seen as a purely human endeavor, which is antithetical. It's in opposition to the concept and the philosophy of history Allah talks about in the Quran. So I'm going to say the quote again, the Instagrammable quote. Until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. Okay, so hopefully that's painted I don't want to say a bleak picture, but it should give everybody a sense of urgency. We need to reclaim our own narrative. And what's subtly embedded within the phrase is a lion is immeasurably more powerful than a hunter. It's only because the hunter has superior firepower and weaponry. So the Muslim nation, I would say, the Muslim community, 2 billion of us, we're all like sleeping giants. We have that charisma and vitality and energy stored deeply within us, but it's latent and it's dormant and it needs to be jolted into action. And history can do that. because I'll just move to the next slide just so we can spice things up a bit. History, number one, immunizes human beings from propaganda. And history is very sobering. Now, October the 7th last year, and whatever's happened in the wake and aftermath of October the 7th, there is an intellectual historical silver lining here, meaning there is an upshot, despite all the bloodshedding and all the gruesome, grueling, harrowing, jarring scenes that we've seen over the last year. There is an upshot, especially for people like us in the West who live luxurious lives like kings, which is October the 7th was a rude awakening. Now, I can't tell you how happy I am after October the 7th to meet people in the street or in cafes or in mosques who have now become aware and cognizant of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict or the genocide. Or, for example, how often did you hear the name Nakba before October the 7th? Now I hear it on everybody else's tongue, which is brilliant. The idea of settler colonialism, the idea of a genocide, of ethnic cleansing, of 1948, of 1967, 1973, the Yom Kippur War, the Six-Day War, all of these terms have now become common parlance. And Israel-Palestine has become a dinner table topic. But why did it take a genocide for us to understand the relevance? Why did it take a genocide to jolt us out of our slumber, to force us to open up and dust off, brush off these dusty books and bring them back out onto the table so we can have a look at, we're not talking about ancient history here, we're talking about recent history. So that was point number one, the lion and the hunter. Until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. You can never get bored of that. Let's move on to the next one. So I have two pictures here. Let me ask the participants first. Now, this man on the right, I hope you can see my cursor. This man on the right, dressed in a fine robe with some very conspicuous headgear on. Who do you think he is? I'll give you 10 to 15 seconds. You can just write it in the chat. The man on the right here. No takers yet. Okay, King of Saudi Arabia, that's fine. Warmer, not King Fahd. I'll give you a clue. The king. A king. Yeah, but there'll be many kings. King Abdul Aziz. And the answer goes to Brother Hussein. King Abdul Aziz. Now, we will, if you've had a look at the handbook, then one of the bonus modules right at the end will be the 3 Saudi states. Now, King Abdul Aziz here was the founder of the 3rd state. And fun fact, all kings of Saudi Arabia up until now have been his sons, have been his direct sons. And he fathered dozens, literally maybe around 50 or 60 children, males, actually. So the current crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is his grandson. So this is King Abdul Aziz, and this picture was taken in 1921. On the right-hand side, you have the Barzan Palace. Let me just move this out of the way. You have the Barzan Palace, as it's called. Now, these two pictures were taken in a Saudi city called Al-Ha'il, which is in the Al-Ha'il province. And the city today has a population of around 500,000. And it's situated in the central plateau of Saudi Arabia, so far removed from the coastal regions and from the more verdant and fertile southwestern part, which is Yemen and Saudi Arabia. This is the city of Al-Ha'il. Now, in 1921, these pictures, well, the picture on the left was taken in 1921. The picture on the right must have been taken shortly before. In 1921, November the 2nd, the Alu Saud, so the family of Saud, which is the tribal grouping King Abdul Aziz belonged to, they conquered the city of Al-Ha'il. And the city of Al-Ha'il had been under the control of the Alu Saud's arch nemesis, so their chief adversaries, another tribal grouping called the Al-Rashid, or the Rashidis for short. The Rashidis were, in fact, Ottoman allies. So 1921, this is just after World War I. The Ottomans are still around, but the clock's ticking because after 3 years, they will cease to exist, as we'll cover in one of the I think the last module, or the second to last module. So with, actually, interestingly enough, with British military assistance, King Abdul Aziz, with British military assistance, has just managed to conquer the city of Al-Ha'il and wrestle it away from the emirate of Jabal Shammar, or the last, you could say, vestige of Ali Rashid power. This was on the 2nd of November 1921. Now, in this picture on the left-hand side, you have King Abdul Aziz, and as part of his victory tour of the city of Al-Ha'il, he's inspecting some Ottoman-issued cannons. So these are Ottoman military cannons that must have been provided to the Al Rashid to keep the Al Saud at bay. And the Ottomans and the Al Saud, meaning the Saud dynasty or family, have had a very, let's say, fractious or a very heated or tense history dating all the way from the mid-1700s. And then on the right-hand side, you have the Barzan Palace. This was built in 1808 by one of the Al Rashid princes, Muhammad, and it was a very simple structure, but you can see this would have been royal luxury for a nomadic Bedouin-esque dynasty within Saudi Arabia. And it was a 3-tiered structure with gardens, with reception halls, with royal quarters, and with diplomatic guest halls. Now, what's the relevance of this? I need to take you back to, well, actually forward from this picture to the year 1927. And I'm sure people must have heard of a man called Muhammad Asad. Muhammad Asad was an Austrian journalist and a scholar par excellence, and he was of Jewish heritage, and he ended up accepting Islam. And he became one of the most prominent philosophers and thinkers of the 20th century. And his work is really cutting edge, and it's really ahead of its time. And he was thinking and philosophizing and conceptualizing issues which Muslims actually suffer from today. So he was a very foresighted and far-sighted thinker. So Muhammad Asad was touring Saudi Arabia, and this was in the wake of the rapid conquests of the Al Saud family, presided over by King Abdul Aziz. And this was, he converted to Islam in 1926. So he was on a 6-year tour and travel on camelback in Arabia. And he's traveling with one of his companions, and his companion's name is Zayd. Now, Zayd, funnily enough, was from the Al Rashid, so the arch nemesis of King Abdul Aziz, a rival kinship group. And they came across Al-Ha'il. Now, this was in the year 1927. So it had been out of Al Rashid control for around 6 years. Road to Mecca, yeah, that's his book, Road to Mecca. It's sort of like his autobiography and his travel log or his memoirs. Highly recommend the read. And it's a real page turner. The contents just jump out of the book right into you. A very immersive book, definitely. So that should be added to your reading list. But I'm sure the reading list will get a bit hefty after you've seen the course handbook, only for those who are more academically inclined. So anyway, this was in the year 1927, and they come to the gates of Al-Ha'il. Now, Zayd had actually made an oath never to approach. This wasn't an actual legally binding oath. It was more of a promise to himself because of the trauma that his clan experienced with the loss of Al-Ha'il. And this was the regional capital as well. So it held symbolic importance. He never wanted to step foot in Al-Ha'il again. So when they were moving past Al-Ha'il, Muhammad Asad asked him, how do you feel about Al-Ha'il? He just wanted to gauge the waters. So Zayd said, I'm not sure how I'm meant to feel. And he said, it's been, and I'll quote exactly what he said, it's been 11 years since I was last here. Thou knowest my heart would not allow me to come here earlier. And then he recited a passage of the Quran, and then he adds something. Then Zayd adds something. The reason why, right, Brother Munir, he's our bibliophilic fact checker over here. He's already found the page. First edition, page 375, 377. Was that ChatGPT or are you the programmer for ChatGPT that you managed to find it? Good stuff, it's there, 375 to 377. Those are the pages. So Zayd adds something. Now, the reason why I'm going to take you through this whole rigmarole and drama of Muhammad Asad and Zayd and Al-Ha'il is because at the end, we come to a definition of history and how Muslims should engage with history. But just bear with me. We'll hopefully wrap up this segment in the next 10 to 15 minutes. So Zayd adds, I'll keep this page on there until we move on to the next slide. He said, no doubt, God gave sovereignty to the house of Al-Rashid, but they did not know how to use it rightly. They were reckless in their pride. So God took away their rule and handed it back to Ibn Saud. I think I should not grieve any longer, for it is not written in the book. Meaning it's not written that we'll reclaim or recapture Al-Ha'il. Sometimes, and he's quoting a passage from the Quran, sometimes you love a thing and it may be worst for you. And sometimes you hate a thing and it may be the best for you. And that was sort of an impromptu prose speech that was given to Zayd whilst they were on horseback and just casually off the cuff, sort of a comment to Muhammad Asad. Now that had a profound impact on Muhammad Asad. And on the next slide, I actually have his reply to that. Oh, this is possibly his reply whilst he was writing later on. So he must have mused over that and really just ruminated over what Zayd had said. And then he came up with this. He said, there is a sweet resignation in Zayd's voice, a resignation implying no more than the acceptance of something that has already happened and cannot therefore be undone. It is this acquiescence, meaning accepting the facts, of the Muslim spirit to the immutability, meaning it can't be changed, of the past. The recognition that whatever has happened had to happen in this particular way and could have happened in no other. That is so often mistaken by Westerners for a fatalism. Fatalism is the idea of what can we do? What's the point even trying? All the odds are stacked against us. Let's just sit back, relax, put our feet up and do nothing to try and better our lot. Fatalism inherent in an Islamic outlook. But a Muslim's acquiescence to fate relates to the past and not to the future. It is not a refusal to act, to hope and to improve, but a refusal to consider past reality as anything but an act of God. Wow, I think I had to read that around 2 or 3 times for it to properly soak into my brain. This is a sensibility of history. Here he's giving us an approach. He's telling us how to train our brains and condition our psyche to approach history, which is, this is a philosophy. History is not a science. History is not an art. In the Western Academy, you'll find books and volumes and academic tomes written from either camp. One group of academics and scholars who say history is a science. So it has to be approached with an empirical set of tools and mechanisms. And then you find people on the other camp who will say, well, history is an art. So they'll say you have to tune into history with your aesthetic side, and you have to turn on your artistic flair to be able to appreciate history. As we'll see with the definition from Ibn Khaldun, history is a philosophy, which means history is about thinking very, very deeply, not just throwing facts and figures and data sets and overcomplicated statistics or narratives of the glorified past, something which you can engage in. It's a history. History is a story of the human experience and the vicissitudes and the ups and downs of human beings. So this is our definition of a historical sensibility, more of like a flair or a mindset that you need to approach history with, and how facts in the past are there, imprinted on stone. They can't be washed away. So you deal with them in a way that can create a roadmap for the future, right? As Muhammad Asad saying here, it's not a refusal to consider past reality. Rather than fatalism, it's about being proactive. So you take the facts, you process them through your own thinking and through the filter of the modern world, and allow it to guide you in the future. Because as Ibn Khaldun has told us, history is cyclical. So I thought that was a really nice way to approach a historical attitude or historical flair or historical mindset. Okay, let's move on. This is interesting. It might seem like a motley or an eclectic mashup of different pictures, but there is a method to this madness here. This is a title, I think it's from maybe The Independent, which is a newspaper, quite a shoddy newspaper, if I must say, from the UK. And this was dated to 2017. Here we are. Title reads, Brexit. Sort of a Marmite topic, a polarizing one. It was the whole deal, if you're not from the UK, of whether Britain should remain within the European Union or secede and pull out and become its own entity. People voted leave over fears of, why has that happened? Over fears of 80 million Turks coming to live in their village, says Vince Cable. And Dr. Vince Cable is an analyst what I want to highlight here is, I think you also had this rhetoric within the pro-Brexit camp, and it was an anti-immigration sentiment where the Turks are coming. And I think Nigel Farage also espoused certain sentiments. Now, to us, Turks are coming. And if you're going to look at this through maybe some statistics and facts from 2016, then there was talk of Turkey becoming part of the EU. So the idea of Turks coming, meaning we don't want Turkey to become part of the EU, so that we'll have to open up our doors to Turkish immigration. That's well and good on the surface. Hidden deep beneath this comment are historical undercurrents. This is underpinned by Britain, and more specifically, Europe's fear of the Ottomans, more specifically. And Dr. Yaqub Ahmed talked about this in one of his lectures. And he said, look at how they're using and weaponizing the past, meaning the powerful, mighty, majestic Ottoman past, and how the Ottomans were the premier Muslim power, not even Muslim power, the premier authority within Europe itself, and how they kept Europe trembling in their boots and in some ways indirectly assisted European ascendancy, which we'll get to all in due course. Now, can you see how within the European conscience, history still plays a massive part? Now, would a Muslim have ever picked up on that sort of dog whistle statement? Would a Muslim have ever become cognizant? Would a Muslim ever read between the lines and understand this is a reference to a past, our own past, and a past which is being referenced today and weaponized today against immigration? So this is an implicit throwback to the Ottomans and a time when, for example, the Ottomans were carrying out raiding naval missions up the River Thames. That's your fun fact for the day. The Ottomans and their sort of irregular navy was sailing all the way up the River Thames to Ireland as well, and to even Iceland, and were harassing the European powers there. We move on to, this should be the final slide. On the left, I'm just going to ask this question just to keep you guys engaged. Who do we have on the left and who do we have on the right? Who do we have on the left and who do we have on the right? I'll give you a couple of minutes. Yeah, so on the left, we have the extremely despicable and the pharaonic ruler, Bashar al-Assad. And then on the right, we have somebody who was touted as, quite recently, Sultan Erdogan, right? The last vestige of the Ottomans. But anyway, we have Erdogan on the left, on the right, who's the president of Turkey. And then on the left, we have Bashar al-Assad, who is the monstrous and vile president of Syria. And atrocities have been committed under his rule with his direct consent and approval. So we hope Allah deals justice swiftly. Something happened between these two. They had a working relationship before 2011. And then in 2011, something happened. Can I get a response from the chat, please? What happened in 2011 that started in Tunisia and spread like a wildfire across the Arab world? Something which is something of a misnomer, right? So it's an inaccurate naming. The Arab Springs, right? We'll just give it the name for now. There are some problems with the naming of the Arab Spring, but that's for geopolitics. The Arab Springs. So in the wake of the Arab Springs, the Syrian resistance fighters rose up against Bashar al-Assad. And certain command elements of the Syrian resistance had set up within Turkey. And Erdogan either turned a blind eye to this, or he actually, to an extent, rolled out the red carpet and allowed the Syrian resistance command to operate from within Turkey. Now, as you can imagine, this soured relations between both of them. And their cordial relations, which existed before, started to rapidly deteriorate. Now, Bashar wants to get back at Erdogan. But what can he do? Maybe military intervention, maybe a trade embargo, maybe revoke the diplomatic status of Turkish consulate members or envoys. What could he possibly do? What could Bashar al-Assad do to drive a dagger deep into the heart of Erdogan and in the Turkish conscience? So what he did was he followed this 3-step rule, which again has been delineated and explained by Dr. Yaqub Ahmed. What did he do? He had the history syllabus of the Syrian national curriculum. He had in the history textbooks of Syria the phrase Syria was under Ottoman control or Ottoman suzerainty. I can't exactly remember the word, but it was to show how Syria was once part of the Ottoman Empire for at least around 400 odd years. So the phrase Syria was part of the Ottoman Empire or was under Ottoman control or custody or was part of the Ottoman domains, which has positive connotations, right? He changed it to Syria was under the control of the Ottoman regime, right? Of the Ottoman regime. So all it took was for Bashar al-Assad to give the go-ahead to change, transform 400 years of prosperous Syrian Arab history under the Ottomans into now, in just at the flick of a switch, all it took was one phrase changing from Ottoman rule to Ottoman regime. And regime obviously has negative connotations of autocracy and absolutism and despotism and oppression and stifling of local culture, everything, all the baggage, all the corollaries that would follow on from oppressive rule. And that really hurt the Turks, and especially Erdogan, where they felt it the most, which was within their historical conscience. Now, why was that such an effective move? It was a dastardly move, but it was an effective, impactful move. Because we have a chain here. We have a chain. The chain is very simple. Language shapes narratives, and narratives will mutate, right? And will develop into ideologies. And ideologies will become deeply entrenched into the hearts of people and will guide them, will form part of their worldview. So I'll give an example. The language was changed from Ottoman rule, which has neutral, at best, neutral or positive connotations, to negative connotations of Ottoman regime. Now that builds a narrative, or narratives, which narratives mostly go unchallenged. Sometimes there is a lack of criticality here. Narratives are adopted wholesale, especially if young children are being indoctrinated with certain narratives or master narratives from a young age in school textbooks. So the narrative now becomes, for 400 years, the Syrian people were suppressed or oppressed, or they were being stifled by the highly centralized Ottoman officials within Istanbul. And the authorities in Istanbul did not give the Syrians any breathing space, any autonomy, any independence, and they were always looking to perpetuate the Arabs and their status of second-class citizens. And that creates the ideology now of, for example, pan-Arabism. Pan-Arabism is the idea that Arabs need to band together. Arabs stand as one united community, and we're facing off with the entire world, and we're standing arms linked with one another against the enemy out there in the world. So what on earth happened to Muslim solidarity? What on earth happened to ummatics, or the idea that the Muslim community stands shoulder to shoulder in solidarity, regardless of ethnicity or race or background or social status? So that goes out of the window, or that at least occupies second position at best. But you see how that's very dangerous. I'll give you another example. I was delivering a speech in a mosque in Rochdale a few weeks ago, and then I asked the audience, majority from the subcontinent, what time are we on? I'll finish in around 5 minutes, inshallah. And I asked the audience members, what happened in 1857 in the subcontinent? Let me actually do this experiment now. Can anybody tell me what happened in 1857? And I'll wait until we have a healthy dose of around maybe 6 or 7 responses until I give my take. Brother Sajid, oh, sorry, not Sajid, Sajjad, thank you very much. Right, I think brother Sajjad, thank you, but no thank you at the same time, right? If you look at brother Sajjad, he gave the answer of Indian mutiny. So in 1857, the Indians, Muslims and Hindus side by side, they rose up against their slave drivers, the British East India Company. Now, the word mutiny, we talked about language, right? Mutiny has negative connotations. Mutiny suggests you are rising up or you're carrying out a revolt or insurgency against a legitimate authority, and you're in the wrong. If somebody mutineers, if somebody carries out a mutiny against somebody else, they're in the wrong. You're disturbing the peace. You're shaking the established status quo, the legitimate status quo. Whereas the British had the British East India Company. We're not even talking about a government. We're talking about a corporation. The British East India Company had a stranglehold over India and had monopolized resources and had stifled expressions of local culture and local autonomy. So the Indian Mutiny is covertly British language or colonial expressions smuggled into everyday parlance. So when you say Indian Mutiny, then the connotations that automatically pop to mind, the images that are evoked in your mind are of a rabble of bandits and marauders and rebels who are fighting a legitimate lawful power, the British, which is, it couldn't be further from the truth. But here we've got British Raj. Uprising again. Uprising is problematic. Indians fought back. That's the one I like. Indian War of Independence. That's what it was. Even though it was abortive, a failure, it's the Indian War of Independence. Okay, and actually, that brings us to the end of this section. There were just a couple of points that I wanted to go through before me and Mufti Muaz will tag team, and we'll sort of tackle the next section together. Let me read Ibn Khaldun's definition of history for you, and that'll give you a flavor of how history involves a lot of deep thinking. Now, what I usually do before I start any of my physical lectures is I'll take a survey. So I'll ask the audience who enjoyed studying history at school, and I'll just pan around the room and I'll have a smirk on my face because I know nobody will put their hands up. Maybe a couple of eager beavers here and there. But most people, when I was in Rochdale, 150 people were there, 3 people put their hands up. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to keep my hand down as well because I absolutely loathed history in schools. You were treated as a CPU, as a computer, and facts were just thrown at you. You're meant to process them as if you're ChatGPT yourself. And then come the exam date, here's a pen, here's a paper, just empty your brain, right, onto whatever's there in front of you, onto the paper. And, without thinking, without absorbing, without owning the information, because it's not your history. It was just World War I, World War II, and then done. And then once the exam's finished, then just drain your brain of all of that information because you'll never use it again. I normally joke, in the popular conception of most people, and I'd say within the Western world, at least in the Anglosphere, then history has 4 stages. There's stage number 1, which is the modern world, very messy, a web of intrigues, lots of geopolitical confusion. I don't know what's happening. Russia, they're the bad guys. America, land of the free and the brave, they're the good guys. We don't know what's happening. The West are the good guys, that's it. And then the next phase of history is there was Hitler. So whatever happened in between, we don't know. There was just Hitler and he did some awful things. And then before that, this is the historical consciousness of maybe your average 15, 16-year-old, the young demographic. And what happened before Hitler? Well, something Game of Thrones-esque. Castles, maybe, fortresses, duels, chivalry, jousting, chainmail, armor. And then what happened before that? Well, something Flintstones-esque, like the cartoon Flintstones, something to do with prehistoric times, and people just walked around with clubs and then they hunted, the hunter-gatherers versus the agriculturalists, and that's pretty much it. This is what we refer to as collective amnesia, right? We've forgotten. We have these huge, massive blind spots. But anyway, Ibn Khaldun, let me just read here. Let me read Ibn Khaldun's definition. A lot of thinking is involved here. The inner meaning of history involves speculation and verifying the truth, subtle causal analyses of the origins of things, and deep knowledge about the conditions under which events occurred and their reasons. For this reason, history is rooted in philosophy, meaning deep, profound thinking, and thus deserves to be counted among the disciplines of hikmah, which is wisdom or philosophy. Dr. Yaqub Ahmed would always say, and I've had a couple of lectures with him and we invited him to deliver a webinar at our institute in Preston here. He said, in the West, history has been divorced or denuded of wisdom, meaning the idea of history being didactic. Didactic means there's a moral here, moral-laden stories. You can take something back. You can learn about the iniquities and the blunders and the atrocities of people in the past. You can forge a roadmap for the future. you can try and better yourself, or you can at least appreciate the human complexity of the story. This has been taken out of Western history. The spiritual aspect of Muslim history has been obfuscated. It's just not there. It doesn't exist. And again, before I go down a rabbit burrow rambling on about things that are to be saved for the course, which we'll do in the first lesson of historiography, let me just say, I'll give you an example. I read a book, it's called The Atlas of Muslim History. Brilliant book, visuals are stunning, lots of maps, and the cartography is on point. But the author makes a very crass comment at the start, and these are tenured professors of history. He said, number one, we can't really say for sure whether the companions, these are the Prophet's disciples, may Allah be pleased with them, call themselves Muslims, right? Were they even Muslims? Did they call themselves Muslims? And if that was the case, if they didn't call themselves Muslims, then how Islamic were the early conquests? And then you have Professor Adam J. Silverstein from Oxford University, a tenured seasoned professor, in his book, A Very Short History of Islam. He says, well, do you know what? The early companions, we're talking about giants like Khalid ibn al-Walid, Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas, Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, Amr ibn al-As, right, titans of early Muslim history. They breached the confines of the Arabian Peninsula just after the Prophet's demise, peace be upon him. And why did they do that? What motivated them? What spurred them on? Well, they were just looking for loot. They were just looking to plunder. Because the Arabs in the pre-Islamic era were used to carrying out tribal raids against other tribes. Now that the other Arab tribes were all Muslim, it's illegitimate or it's illicit to carry out raids against fellow Muslims. So who do we want to raid? Just because there's this tribal impulse. We just need to let this pent up, this proclivity to raid, just let it out. There's a chimpanzee within us. We want to raid. So there you go. Just ad hoc raids against the Byzantines and the Persians. As if you carry out an ad hoc raid operation against these two mighty hyperpowers, right? Which is very problematic. But these things are bought on wholesale. It's called Islamic historical revisionism, where they try to revise history, and when I say they, I mean Western scholars, not all of them. I don't want to make a sweeping generalization here. Not all of them, but people who have maybe an agenda, or people who can't access our sources, or people who analyze history from a secular lens. So very quickly, before I wrap up here, the Quran is a book of history, right? Because 1/3 of the Quran contains historical narratives. And these narratives within the Quran, they aren't linear, right? They don't follow a chronology. Allah doesn't start with Adam alayhi salam's story and then ends with the prophets. Allah intersperses these stories sporadically across the Quran. So you might come across Musa's here, and then jump back in time to maybe Adam, and then fast forward quickly to maybe Isa, and then jump back in time to some of the Israelite prophets. This might seem a bit odd, but there is a very important rationale here, which is Allah has collapsed human history into one story in the Quran. Allah has collapsed it. He's distilled it into one story. He might not talk about it chronologically, but he's talking about it didactically. Didactically means you're taking a lesson. These Quranic stories are lesson orientated, meaning the central pivot, the central pillar of these Quranic historical narratives aren't facts and data, because a lot of the times dates, you don't even find a single date in the Quran. Dates and data are omitted from the Quran because they're seen as irrelevant. You don't need a date to become a better person. You need a lesson, you need a moral. So they all revolve around a certain point. That's what we mean by lesson orientated. And they're lesson orientating, meaning the Quran seeks to build what's called narrative communities. We are being fed the Quranic narrative, which means we become a community that has now absorbed and imbibed this Quranic narrative. And the Quranic narrative is lesson orientating. It wants you to take a lesson back. It wants you to take something back and think, you know what? I can implement this in my life, or I can operationalize this somewhere in my life. And it talks about the agency of Allah. So I think I've rambled on for too long now. And hopefully that should give you a little bit of an insight. It should have whet your appetite, left you salivating a little bit, and at least given you the impetus to study history, whether it's with our program, whether it's by reading a book, whether it's something else, just go out and study, because we can't risk losing our narratives to people who don't appreciate its sensitivities. So those points are really important. Language, narrative, ideology, the hunter, Bashar versus Erdogan, Muhammad Assad and Zayd, these historical sensibilities, right? The past is immutable. You can't change it. but you can take lessons from it, and then you can devise and forge a roadmap for the future. So thank you for listening so attentively. We'll quickly move into now. How can I, let's see, stop sharing and let me open up, and respected Mufti Muaz can jump in as well. We thought we'd tag team this. So here we have, I hope you can see the screen. Actually, let me just put it in full screen. Right, so this is the course handbook. And this is a breakdown of the terms or semesters. So there's term 1, we have term 2, and then we have term 3. Unlike the Quran deals with these topics anthologically, right? We will be dealing with things chronologically, which is not how the Quran does things, but we have to start from somewhere. The idea here is we want this to be the first step for you to take in a long, meandering journey to becoming more cognizant and more associated with your past. Because believe me, the past is sobering, and I've been studying it for a few years now, and I studied with my credentials at the start, if anybody's a little bit skeptical. I studied with a professor from down south, well, in the UK, in Birmingham, Dr. Steph Kerris. Did a diploma with him last year, or 2 years ago, I think it was. So you can check out his YouTube page and all of his different work. But it really puts into perspective how, for example, some of these myths, like we're living in the worst age of human history, or we have never faced more calamitous events or tragic cataclysms in the Muslim past. It shows you we have faced serious problems, existential crises, but we have always rebounded. Muslims have always managed to regain their footing, and we've always managed to recover and resuscitate ourselves simply because of our faith. So it's these narratives of history are very edifying and very sobering as well. If you have a look here, we've got dynasties, individuals, and movements. We start off with historiography. Historiography is a study of how to actually carry out history and how history has been documented, sort of like the principles, preliminary points needed to jump into history. Then we have these first 4 lessons, the rightly guided caliphs, Abu Bakr to Hassan, radiallahu anhum. And then we have the Umayyads, we'll jump to Syria. And then I've just come back from an academic conference in Granada in Spain. So this is sort of my forte, which is Muslim Spanish history. The Umayyads, based in Cordoba, the Ta'ifas, the Almoravids, the Almohads, the Nasrids, the Morisco ethnocide. Have you heard of any of these? Have you ever come across them? Maybe a passing reference. Here, we'll give you just enough information for you to be able to build your own chronological timeline in your head, not too much so that we're waterboarding you, we're overwhelming you, but enough for you to be able to build an accurate reflection in your head of what these dynasties or what these states or mini-states stood for, what they represented, the contributions they made, and how we arrived geopolitically, demographically today in the Muslim world. How did we arrive at this position that we find ourselves in today? And then we jump back over to the East, the heartlands of Islam, with the Abbasids, the Abbasid Golden Age, right? This is a phrase that I absolutely loathe, right? The Golden Age. I don't like it one bit. And in academic work, rule of thumb, if anything's enclosed or encased within these inverted commas, it means that there's some speculation around it or it's not taken seriously. And we'll debunk the idea of an Islamic Golden Age and how it's a product of colonial intervention and also Western scholarship. Then we look at the Muslim Commonwealth. That brings term 1 to an end. Term 2, right? And this is where people really fall off the cliff historically because a lot's happening and it does get a little bit messy. But if you hold my hand, then I'll navigate you through all of these labyrinths, historical mazes, and we can come to the finishing point here. So the Fatimids, Mediterranean frontier states, Ghaznavids, Great Seljuks of Rome, which is modern-day Anatolia, Turkey, the Crusaders, Zengids and Ayyubids, the assassins, right? This, to be honest, this didn't warrant its own. This doesn't warrant. The assassins of Alamut does not warrant its own lecture, but I just had to include it because if you're, so I'm 24, right? And when I was younger on PlayStation, there used to be a game called Assassin's Creed, if anybody's heard of it. Assassin's Creed, right? The game is actually based off of this, and it became a hit franchise. I think a movie was made of it as well. And it was actually based off of these guys. they were Shia, right? But they are very they're mythologized in a sense, but then they play, I want to say a massively impactful role, but it just highlights a small, really interesting tidbit or nugget from Muslim history. And I thought I'd just throw that in there as a bit of a curveball, and we can have a look at something, a bit of a change of pace from all these dynasties and professional governance and administration. We move to something a little bit adventurous with the Assassins of Alamut, which is a mountain or a rock face in Iran. Yeah, so Mullah Mufti Muaz is saying you're not allowed on this course if you haven't played Assassin's Creed. So I think I should add to the essential reading part. Grab yourself a PlayStation and play some Assassin's Creed. Anyway, Assassins for the Fatimid dynasty, yes and no. They had overlaps, but don't worry, we'll get to it. We'll get to it. We don't want to jump the gun. Delhi Sultans, Mongol rupture, Mamluks, the Abbasid Shadow Caliphate. That sounds cool, doesn't it? Sounds like something from a James Bond movie, Shadow Caliphate. We'll get to that. The Ilkhans, the Timurids, Prince of Destruction was his name, Timur. The Safavids. How did Iran go from a Sunni majority bastion to now a Shia theocratic state? With Iran today, the Safavid history should be able to tell us. And then we have the Mughals, the Ottomans. Oh, come on, I can't talk about the Ottomans in one session. The Ottomans, the tenacious 10. This is my own periodization. Periodization means you cut up history into small, manageable, bite-sized chunks so that it becomes easier to digest. The tenacious 10. So the first 10 sultans warrant not an in-depth, because we don't have the time for that, but a profiling of each one of them independently on their own terms. And then the Ottomans until dissolution, which is a mammoth task, but I mean, we'll try our best. Then we have geographical groupings. So I couldn't really identify these 5 geographical areas with certain dynasties because there was a lot of fluctuation and back and forth, sort of like a tug of war. We have the Balkans, which is Eastern Europe. So Bosnia, I went to Bosnia at the start of this year, 2024. Brilliant place, mesmerizing, enchanting, lots of history. People should go. West Africa with Timbuktu. So when I used to, my mum actually, when I was younger, she used to say, whenever I used to ask a silly question, Mum, where are you going? And when I used to ask in the morning, Mum, are we going to school today? Then my mum would say, no, we're going to Timbuktu, as a bit of a sarcastic remark. Right? So Timbuktu, in my imagination, was always this, fantastical place in Africa somewhere, and it's, I don't know, is it a backwater? Is it a mythologized kingdom? What is Timbuktu? It's just a place in Africa. But actually, Timbuktu was part of the Mali Empire, and Timbuktu became a major center of trade and learning and civilization. Okay, we have East Africa, then the Malay Archipelago, Southeast Asia. But this is nauseating. Islam was spread by the sword. Islam is an inherently violent religion, blah, 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 the stereotypes, the cliches, all of those nauseating statements. We'll actually cover this in Umar radiallahu anhu section. Was Islam spread by the sword? We'll be debunking that. But this is the perfect case study to prove Islam was not spread by the sword, because this entire region, the most populous Muslim region on the face of this earth today, which is Indonesia, around 250 million Muslims, and no armies were sent from the Muslim heartlands. It was all through good old-fashioned proselytization, or da'wah, which is missionary outreach work. And voila, an entire archipelago now becomes Muslim. Fascinating. And I thought, well, because of the controversy Saudi Arabia is currently embroiled in, let's look at the 3 Saudi states. So just to give you an idea of scaling, right? So I've delivered some sessions with siblings of ilm, and you can maybe visit their website to have a look at the courses. Some expanded sessions on the Umayyads in Damascus and Umayyads in Cordoba. Now, I'm attempting to cover the Umayyads in Damascus, a Herculean task, in one session of 1.5 hours. The expanded version I delivered with siblings of ilm was 10 sessions long, and they lasted for around 100 years. Right? Just to show you how much there is out there and how much depth we can actually go into. But we're just going to skim over the surface, right? But that doesn't mean the course will be underwhelming. What it means is you can just read through these things yourself. A little bit about the Muslim Odyssey, a little bit about myself. Student induction, so it shows the different phases we're going to be covering. Maybe not 5 and 6, about colonialism and the Wild East, 20th century nationalism. We don't have the time for that. What you'll find in this module, in this module handbook, is targeted reading quarters, multimedia resources, so videos from YouTube. Now, I won't just suggest any old platform. I'll have already watched this myself and then suggested it. And in the lesson, if there's anything that I need to warn you guys about, then I'll give you a prior heads up. Maps as well. Some of the maps can be a little bit of an assault on your senses because there's a lot happening, but we'll dissect them in class properly. And further references, split between beginner and intermediate reading levels. You can again read this yourself. These are some of the things we'll be covering very briefly to give you a holistic overview. I'm conscious we're coming up to the end of our time in about 10 minutes. We'll briefly run through economics, politics and administration, religious trends and heresiology, so different sects. More specifically, we'll be looking at Sunnism and Shiism, how that developed, very, very briefly, but just to give you a bit of a silhouette outline, so at least you've got something to work with if you want to pursue this further. Islamic intellectualism, diplomacy and foreign policy, culture, architecture, and civilization. So what usually happens is and the reason why some of the more classical books on Muslim history have their limitations is because they'll only ever talk about this, politics and administration, right? So the changing fortunes or the wheel of fortune for states and kings and caliphs and soldiers, and that's it. How they governed and the demographic changes, maybe migration patterns, commercial enterprises, cross-cultural pollination, all of that's left out. So we'll hopefully be plugging those gaps. And again, you can read this. My email address is there as well. So this is the narrative arc we'll be following within the classroom. More specifically, right, why and how, which is Ibn Khaldun's approach to history. We'll be answering the question of why things happened and how things happened, rather than just the what. The what can be found, simple facts online. And then we have, okay, essential reading, right? I might need to rephrase this to recommended reading. Now, this was sent out with the course handbook and the initial advert, which was published 2 months ago, maybe mid-September. So the idea was, here are a list of books, and I've actually rearranged them. I would strongly recommend working your way through the books in the order they are listed above. And what I've said is, look, you've got 2 months till the course starts, and I want this to be a philanthropic endeavor. I want this course and project to be a mode of philanthropy. When I say philanthropy, I mean, think of the phrase, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Give a man a fishing rod, you feed him for a lifetime. I want this course to be your fishing rod. So instead of making you dependent on me, I'm just giving you all the facts, and then I'm tethering you to myself. So I want you to become my posse, and I want you to become my entourage, and I don't want you to ever graduate to a stage where you can do your own independent reading and thinking. I want you to always be attached to me and my circle. I don't want that. I want you to move away from me. There should be a stage where you proverbially fly away from the nest. So I'm going to recommend reading, give you sources, people you can trust, people you might want to take with a pinch of salt, people to really not touch with a barge pole. So here you have some books. And I mean, what date are we on today? 23rd of November. The course starts in around 12 days, 5th of December. So if you haven't started reading, then I suggest, and this is purely an advisory, purely a recommendation, if you want, you can read one of these books. And this gives you a sort of brief, panoramic, comprehensive overview of Muslim history. Maybe not everything we're going to talk about, and there'll surely be stones left unturned, but at least gives you a bit of a foundation. But you don't have to. You don't have to. Remember, this is all about complementing and supplementing the information I give you in class. Each lesson, each lecture will be self-contained. So I'm actually delivering this course on site in Blackburn. So I'm sort of using them without being flippant. I'm using them as my guinea pigs, right? But they are a brilliant bunch. And that's sort of like the experimental dry run. So one of the lads said his manager from work saw the poster, and his manager, non-Muslim manager, wants to join the course. He said, will it be suitable? I said, by all means, bring him along. You'll notice I don't normally give words in Urdu. I don't give words in Arabic unless it's a sanctified, sacred term. I'll give you the English. I'll always give you an English translation. Piece of the Quran, a hadith, I'll supply you with the translation, right? So you'll never feel confused about any words that I might use. Okay, I'll just leave the chat going on the side. So this is open to beginners. So the contents will be pitched to beginners and then to intermediate students, people who have zero background. Jump on board, and I guarantee you by the end of the course, you'll be able to build a robust timeline of Muslim history and at least be able to identify key players, and you'll be and bringing you up to date, which is the purpose of a crash course. Now, for the more academically inclined students, and I know Mufti Muaz has his hand deep within the scholarly community across the world, all credit to his work. So I can imagine a lot of scholars and graduates and seminarians will be on this course as well. So, and to be brutally honest, a lot of us, and I am a part of this demographic, a lot of us will be starting from a point of zero as well. So we'll be starting with a clean slate, or tabula rasa as it's called, with no prior information. That's brilliant. Come along. I'd always say empty thy cup, which is do a little bit of unlearning first before learning. Learning is a process of learning and then unlearning and then relearning. So there might be some things that I might say, you know what, it's not worth knowing, just jettison it from your brain. I'll give you a replacement or a substitute theory, because a lot of misinformation, disinformation even exists within the historical record. So here you have a couple of books, and there is only one book here written by a non-Muslim, Karen Armstrong. Again, readers beware. Readers' discretion is advised, because there are some problematic statements, but on the whole, it's okay. Then you have Tamim Ansari, and I've highlighted him because he is a Muslim modernist. So he subscribed to the idea of a progressive trajectory of history and a couple of other points as well. So again, just keep your wits about him. But the rest of them, again, keep your wits about everything. Approach everything with a level of criticality. Criticality does not equate to criticism, right? You just pinpoint faults everywhere, and you're always lacing into things and breaking it apart, and you're always negatively criticizing. Criticality just means owning the information, processing it for your own brain. What does it mean to you? Is there something you don't understand? Is there something you might find a little bit off, or something you might find a bit peculiar? If that's the case, is there an inherent bias within you? Do you just have knowledge limitation? Have you reached the ceiling of your abilities? Should you ask somebody else? That's what I mean by criticality. Now, you have 1.5 weeks. If you want to start with anything and you can get it done overnight, A Story of Two Civilizations, Ridwan Salim. Ridwan Salim is a doctor, middle-aged, from down south. One of his books was actually gifted to me, this book, Story of Two Civilizations. And it was a treasure trove. Very simplistic, very user-friendly, but jam-packed, loaded with information. Very incisive, like a trenchant, courageous take on Muslim history, trying to wrestle that agency back to Muslims so Muslims can tell their own story. Lost Islamic History, everybody's read, which is a staple. But time is of the essence, so this one I suggest you put on your reading list. Is there a good summarization of Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah? So actually, let me just quickly grab this. So I actually have a summary translation by Franz Rosenthal, and this is a condensed version of his history of Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah. The Muqaddimah is his sort of preface and introduction to a larger chronicle. And Ibn Khaldun, we'll be talking about him a lot. He is a polymath, lived around the 14th century of Yemeni descent, and he belonged to a bureaucratic elite family who settled in Spain, and he was a politician who moved from one state to another in North Africa. And this book, right, is very long, right? Franz Rosenthal's, his English translation is a lot bigger. It's in about 2 volumes, right? So yeah, Franz Rosenthal. I'll put this in the chat, right? Also, we have a Telegram group that you can discuss on, and we have a book recommendation group. Okay, so we're almost at the end of our time. Let me just give you an example. So this is for term 1 so far, and about 40 pages, and I'm going to release them one term at a time. Let's just take, for example, all right, here. So this is the one we're currently on in the physical course. So lessons 2 to 5, the rightly guided caliph. So here you have a beginner section, right? Lessons in Islamic history, 81 to 100. So bear in mind, this is 20 pages worth of recommended reading for beginners over 5 weeks, right? Over 5 weeks. So 20 pages over 5 weeks, you can stroll through it at your own leisurely pace. And we'll hopefully, there'll be a student portal. Mufti Muaz will give a link to that. And you'll find a lot of the resources. If there's a PDF available, fingers crossed, hopefully most of them will do. This particular one doesn't. But what I will do is I have the book, so I'll maybe take scans and screenshots and upload them so we can have our own PDF, so at least students can use it. The beginner books, I'll definitely do that. So that's 20 pages worth of reading over 5 weeks. If you don't want to do that, you do not need to. We can appreciate people's commitments. Time can be very constricted for a lot of people, and you might have 20 million things going on in your life. So if you can't commit to any reading, don't worry. You can still join the course. You don't have to constantly catch up with previous reading. You just join the lesson, and the lessons are self-contained and they're insular. What I mean by that is you can join the lesson. You don't even need to take notes, although I would highly encourage notation. And then all you can do is listen to the lesson, like Mufti Muaz said, sit back with a cup of tea, relax, soak it in. And then by the end of that, you'll have all the information you need. This is all about complementing and supplementing what you learn in class. And a lot of this will be for the academically inclined students. Then we have the intermediate seminarian reading. So there's an Urdu book here, Tarikh Ummati Muslima, Al-Tarikh Al-Islami Al-Wajiz by Dr. Taqoosh, and then The Preaching of Islam by Thomas Arnold. Again, this is quite hefty, around 70 sides, but again, you've got 5 weeks for this. And additional resources. So afterwards, later on, after the course finishes, and you want to study maybe a little bit more about the Orthodox Caliphate period, here are some books you can tap into. History of the Four Caliphs, Al-Bajuri. If it's in English, then I won't make a note. If it's in Arabic, then obviously the title will be in Arabic. So here, that's there. Multimedia, right? So on your commute in the morning, on the train, in the car, making your way to and from work, you can listen to these things. So you hear Early Muslim Expansion, feature-length documentary, complete with visuals and cinematic map displays, Kings and Generals, brilliant channel. Their visuals are phenomenal, so have a look at that. It's about 1.5 hours long. Put it on ×2 speed if you want, and just listen to it in the background. Or maybe, I mean, if you're used to having a movie night, then this can be a movie night. They are genuinely quite immersive and riveting. Then you have Khalid ibn Walid, A Profile of a Warrior, riveting university lecture with enchanted storytelling techniques, Professor Roy Casagrande. He is a gem, very sympathetic to the Islamic cause. You can find that online. And we've got some maps, right? What expansion looked like at the time of the Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, then with the next few companions. And then this is something I've started to add. So when I sent out a survey to my students with the on-site course, they said, could you add an overview, right? So some notes that we can use, like a conspectus, and then we can use them as revision notes. So I said, sure. So here you have an overview of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu's period. Geopolitical makeup of Arabia. What does an Orthodox Caliphate mean? Periodization, a historical meeting, Usama's expedition, the apostasy wars, compilation of the Quran, campaigns, and then his demise. Same with Umar radiallahu anh, a bit more hefty, but I mean, I've done the note taking for you, but I would still recommend it. And then Uthman, I just need to add now, radiallahu anh. Some other points, for example, I'll always be adding things to this. So here you have a breakdown of territorial acquisition. So by the end of the Orthodox Caliphate, 3.5 million square miles worth of land had now been brought under Muslim control. And then you have a list of all the major battles. And hopefully that will be the case for every single one. If you're lucky, there'll be some coinage and currency, numismatics, as it's called, the study of currency. And then the same goes for most of these. Right at the end, there's a timeline. Here in English, another one in Arabic there. So I hope that covers everything. If you do have any questions, then fire away. I'll hand it over to Mufti Muaz if he has anything. I think I missed a couple of things, but you can.
That was really enlightening, and I think we all really benefited from that. Just I think I found it interesting when you spoke about how little we know about history. Just on a lighter note, I kind of asked my wife today that we're doing a history course, so what's your thoughts on history? And she just looked at me like, that meme when you got two guys just looking at each other with that type of small eyes, and she's like, I live in the present. So, if you're like one of those type of people, this course is for you. Don't worry. Just one more thing I wanted to mention is there may be some ulama on this course. Now, obviously, ulama, you could be from a Shafi'i background, etc. I really benefited from this handbook. I mean, we've not even started the course yet, but I was just reading certain things, and it's really something from a Hanafi perspective, and that's kind of what my area of expertise, in the sense that not expertise, but something I'm working on, which is a Hanafi book, and the history and the kind of development of the madhab, and just understanding the importance of even empires like the Seljuks, and the role they played in how did Hanafis, like the author of Bada'i'us Sana'i, Al-Ghasani, etc., they end up in the West, so to speak, and the tradition of the East kind of comes to the West. I'm not saying we're going to cover exactly the Hanafi idea in the course, but you kind of might be able to appreciate certain aspects once we understand the history behind it. It's really going to open your eyes, especially stuff like, for example, just today I've been reading about the Mamluks, and I've been reading about Sherman Jackson's. I've been reading his book, The Constitutional Jurisprudence of Shahabuddin al-Qarafi. So the idea that the Mamluks were were giving a lot of power to the ulama, so to speak, or creating this type of pluralism within the ulama, the four chief qadis, to kind of almost legitimize their own rule at times, etc. These are the types of ideas that really help us to understand even our fiqh books, our aqidah books. So even aqidah, I mean, how much of intellectual history plays a role in aqidah, the rise of Ash'arism, so to speak, or the role of the Nizamiya colleges, etc., that we'd probably touch on as well. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And also, before we move to any questions, I guess we've really run over time, but just want to reiterate. So if you go on the website, www. I might have said it 4 times, I do apologize. www.islamicknowledge.co.uk. The course is there. So I'd like everyone, please, to make sure that, inshallah, if you want to be on the course and you don't want to miss out on, having to catch up on recordings later on because you joined late, please do enroll for the course in the next 2 weeks, literally. The course starts on 5th December, which is a Thursday, 8:30 p.m. Thursday, and it's 1.5 hours every single week. Mullah, should we open up for questions, or I think it has gone quite late? We could maybe just do 5 minutes, maybe. And if we want.
If anybody doesn't want to stay for this segment, then you're more than welcome to leave. Feel free to just
absolutely
take your way out if you don't have a question. Will you touch on post-Ottoman Islamic history up to the modern day in the 3rd term? So, as much as I'd love to, if you read the student induction, page 5, then I've got it here, right? So periodization's here. We're going to cover periods 1 to 4, beginning High Caliphal Imperium, Muslim Commonwealth, gunpowder empires. As I've said here, the last 2, European dominance, colonialism, and the 20th century Wild East, which is modern day history. Because of obvious time limitations, we can't cover them in 1 year. So maybe if I give myself a breather after this and then come up with a division of the syllabus, then maybe we can cover that at a later date. I hope that answers your question. Are you working on your own book of Islamic history? Not necessarily. I think this is more effective. The idea is to popularize history and bring it to the masses. So I see myself, rather than academic, more of a popularizer. So I can bring it to your doorstep and make it more relevant, and hopefully you can resonate with that. And then you can go back and maybe do your own thing. I am currently working on an MA at a local university, and the thesis will be on a certain element of history. For example, well, I'm still working on an abstract, but it most likely I'm leaning in the direction of talking about the Cordoban Umayyads and how certain ideas of Islam have been secularized. The secularization of certain sanctified ideas like jihad, and we'll cover this we'll cover this quite frequently, where a ruler who carries out jihad, very ideologically driven in his own chronicles and in his own words, autobiography. For some reason, some Western scholars have this fixation and obsession with undercutting that Islamic legitimacy. So I'll give an example. It's something called the Ghazi thesis. So the idea is the Ottomans started off as these humble frontier kings of Islam, working towards justice and expanding their domains to raise the banner of Islam. Then you have people like Lowry, for example, an Orientalist scholar, who says, well, you know what? They were, the early Ottomans, were they even Muslim? Osman Ghazi, was he even a Muslim? These guys were still practicing sort of shamanic or pagan polytheistic rituals. They weren't really Islamically motivated. They were just raiding for plunder and loot, as tribal bandits and marauders do. So you see here how the Islamic essence is being sapped away. So one particular area of research that I'm currently working on is a man called Ibn Amir, or Ibn Abi Amir, the Amirids. He launched around 56 offensive jihad campaigns in Spain against the northern Christians. And he even took back the church bells from a major pilgrimage site and placed them in the Grand Mosque of Cordoba as lights, so sort of to rub salt in the wounds. But his legacy has been besmirched or stained in a sense where, again, that sanctified ideal of jihad has been de-sanctified or secularized. So it was more for political showmanship or as a political ruse. Sorry, I went on another ramble there. Okay, so I hope that answers that question.
Well, no,
I'll wait a minute or two.
I don't know if I mean you've been speaking for over an hour. If you feel like we should we should stop, I'm more than happy to stop. I'm sure you deserve a well-earned dinner if you've not already had one.
No, I'm fine. Don't worry about me. I think we'll just give Mufsan, if you think it's okay, just a minute, some extra questions, and then
So am I okay to go and have
Sure.
my well-earned dinner,
Yeah,
inshallah?
no problem, no problem.
I'll let you finish off. Jazakumullah khair. Absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed the session. Jazakumullah khair.
Appreciate it. If we have no more questions, yes, it's a 1-year course, 1 year. 1 year, 37 modules, 37 lessons. Lecture 37 here. 1 year intensive. If we don't have any other questions, then we can wrap up. I'll just give yourselves maybe another 30 seconds. So here we'll have 3 terms. Term 1 here, first 15. Term 2, 16 to 32, and then term 3, which is quite short, 33 to 37. Now, this was originally to be grafted onto the UK academic timetable or the academic year. So from September to September. We're starting in December, so there will probably be a couple of discrepancies, but it's fine. We'll work with them. We will have the holidays off, by the way. So December holiday. So the December, I don't want to say Christmas, but the winter holidays, the Easter holidays, summer holidays, half terms as well. We'll have those off. So this is actually based off of, this is formatted according to the academic year in the UK. Latecomer here, is there a WhatsApp group for the course? Yes, there is. Yes, there is. Ramadan, that's a good question. I think Ramadan, we might have it off. We might take Ramadan off, and then I might maybe take a week off of Ramadan and then add it to the summer holidays. Give and take, we can play around with it. Recordings will absolutely be available. Yeah, so lifetime access to the recordings and all of the material. Latecomer here, is there a WhatsApp group for the course? There's a WhatsApp group, but we don't actually have many conversations on the WhatsApp group, more so on the discussions group on Telegram. But the WhatsApp group is more for notifications and updates. Hope that clears that up. But like I said, please do peruse this, the preface, all of these couple of pages, about 4 or 5 pages, and it should give a good overview and gear yourself up. Okay, I think we can successfully wrap up there. Jazakumullah khairah. Oh, sorry. Which classical Arabic scholar would you class as the best historian of all time and why? I think you want this to run into the AM midnight hours, brother Ahmed. Ibn Khaldun, there is no question about it. Ibn Khaldun, I don't have to think about that one. Ibn Khaldun is a polymath, and unfortunately he's appreciated more in Western circles as the father of sociology, more than in our circles. His book is phenomenal. Al-Muqaddimah. He's a deeply profound thinker. Ibn Khaldun. 570, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, there might be differing views, or the lunar calendar might overlap. But as far as I'm aware, it's 570. Apart from that, my email address is there, and usually I'm not too fussed about cold calls on my phone or WhatsApp. So if you really feel like you need a conversation, then you can feel free to call me. I might have to explain to my wife, but it's good enough. Okay, right. So I'll finish there. The summary of Ibn Khaldun. Well, it's not a summary. It's more of a distillation or an abridgment, you could say, of his Muqaddimah. It's translated by Franz Rosenthal, who's an exceptional scholar. Franz Rosenthal, and it's called, well, it's called the Muqaddimah, and then the subtext is I'll just put it here, an introduction to history, the classical Islamic world of, the classic Islamic history. Now, this isn't actually a book of history, it's a book which explains the philosophy behind history, and he talks about lots of different things. What do you make of Ibn Battuta's Rihla? Fantastic. He shows you how the reality was on the ground. Funny things like in East Africa, place of the Muslim world, he comes across entirely naked people, naked tribes, or that don't cover up properly. And this was just after, coinciding with the Mongol rampage. So it shows that things weren't all rosy and red during early stages of Islamic history, which is we sort of tend to exoticize or fetishize or maybe see Islamic history through a nostalgic lens, rose-tinted lenses. It wasn't all doom and gloom. At the same time, it wasn't a utopia. And the final point about Ibn Battuta, just so I don't go off on, I don't rabbit too much, but there's something really funny. When he came to Constantinople, then he said, can I have, Constantinople was still under Roman Byzantine rule. So he asked for a translator, an Arabic translator. Now, how often do you think an Arab would end up in Constantinople, right? And how often do you think he'd ask for a translator? Ibn Khaldun didn't just want to go on with his daily life. He wanted to really engage with the people. So he asked for a translator. Now, the Byzantine translator must have been a right scam artist, because he had been taking a wage from the Byzantines after he had touted himself as, I'm a professional Arabic translator, but he didn't know a word of Arabic. So his day of reckoning came when he was called by the authorities. We have an Arab, and he's called for a translator, and he must have been trembling in his boots. He thought, oh, I'm done for now. So he started, Ibn Battuta spoke in Arabic, and then he started speaking absolute gibberish and nonsense. So Ibn Battuta said, I have no idea what he was saying. It was like he was just speaking in another foreign language. He wasn't speaking Arabic, that's for sure. And after that, Ibn Battuta said along the lines of, well, you know what, he probably had a good rollicking by the Byzantine officials, just taking a wage from them for so long. Anyway, I'll finish on this. How do you advise taking notes? Well, the notes, I mean, it depends from person to person. Just maybe have a laptop or a physical notepad, and then just note the main points, right? Note down the main points. I mean, the art of notation is different from person to person, but if you write down the main points, a couple of dates, and the key events, then that should be the bare minimum, the bedrock of your notes. Philosopher Khatib's lectures in Ottoman Empire, they are fantastic as well. I think he delivered them with Darul Qasim in Chicago. And again, he really puts into perspective history. He contextualizes it, right? He adds the different dimensions, and he highlights the historical importance of events and how they change the world. Will any summary be provided in the chat for each lesson? Not in the chat, but as part of this here. Where are we? Here, look, so here's an overview. So I'll actually write this up. I'll type it up. After each lesson, I'll type it up using my own notes. So you've got everything here, right? And this is your one-stop shop. Will that make sense, Munir? And Abdul Rahman, how intense would you say the course is? It depends how intense you want it to be, right? So that's why there are different layers. It's a tiered, multi-tiered course, meaning if you don't have enough time and you're already juggling the commitments of a seminary course, which is grueling in and of itself, then what I would say is just join the lessons, listen, and that's good enough. Literally, I wish I had something like this when I was studying. This was all self-taught, and then afterwards I had to refine it through an academic process. But if I had something like this, just to be able to put other Islamic scholarly and intellectual trends into perspective, then it would have helped a lot. It's just to help contextualize everything that you learn. So if you have enough time, right, joining the lesson is a must, right? And I would say try to join the lessons on time during the actual live slot, because afterwards, very rarely do people review the recordings unless you're an eager beaver. So don't give yourself that alibi to say, well, I don't have to do it, or I can't do it, I'll defer it to a later date. If you do need to catch up on a recording, try and do it on the weekend before the next session. And again, if you have a little bit of extra time, then here, the extra readings there, the beginner's material is all there. If you don't want to read anything, that's fine. You don't have to read anything. It's all up to you. Difficult to join time zone issues. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. But as long as you're disciplined enough to be able to haul yourself to the computer desk and watch the recordings as soon as they're released, then I don't think you have any problems. Okay, we'll end it there. The proportion between historical text and images, is it 50-50 or more so use of maps and images, mind maps, timelines? I don't think I've understood that question properly. So I'll be giving you information in the classroom, and I'll have a virtual whiteboard. And then at the same time on my screen, I'll have these maps open. So we'll constantly be referring back to the course. Not to the course, sorry. My mind's a bit fried. Back to the images and the maps. Is this pre-course session recorded? Yes, it should be recorded. It should be recorded. Then Mufti Muaz will have it, and I'll ask him if you can release that as well. Okay. I think we should be done now. So Jazakumullah khairan for listening so attentively. And hopefully I'll see you all on the course in 1.5 weeks' time. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.